Hello, you're welcome to another of our sessions in social psychology. Today we are going to look at social perceptions. We have some questions we want to find answers to. Basically, we want to ask, what are perceptions? Are perceptions the same as opinions? What are the things that influence the perceptions we have about people, the perceptions we have about things or situations? And can we use the perceptions we have to explain the behaviors of others? Do the perceptions we have change? And under what circumstances will these perceptions change? So in this session, basically what we are seeking to do is to define and explain the process of social perception and to identify the temporary way of doing this by looking at nonverbal communication and to determine what the channels of communication are and how these cues or channels are used in the social perception process. So we're going to define the concepts of social perceptions, define and identify the channels of nonverbal communication, and determine the functions of nonverbal communication in this very session. I expect that you will be helped by reading chapter 3 of the required text and the article on nonverbal communication posted on Sakai. So, what is social perception? We say that social perception is a process that we use to understand other persons as well as ourselves. And this process is twofold: understanding the temporary causes of behavior and understanding the more permanent causes of behavior. So we are going to have this discussion in two sessions. In this present session, we are going to focus on the temporary causes of behavior. How do we explain people's behavior temporarily? To do that, let's define first the concept of nonverbal communication. What is it? Simply, it is communication that does not involve the content of spoken language. So you are communicating without words and using other channels such as your face, facial expressions, eye contact, body movements to communicate to others. So just as you communicate through your face, through your eyes, through your body language, others are also communicating same. So as you try to read others, they also try to read you to make sense of what it is that you are trying to send across. Nonverbal communication is a silent language, but it tells a lot about people's moods, people's emotions, and people's behavior without they necessarily using words. So what are the channels of nonverbal communication? One of the basic channels is the face, facial expression. And this is one of the channels that has been the subject of research for a very long period. It's said that a human being's emotions and attitudes and behavior can be depicted, how a person feels, on his face. In fact, the renowned philosopher Cicero says that the face is the image of the soul. So if I ask you, how are you, and you tell me you are fine, I can just look at your face to determine if you are really fine. And it says that we all communicate through our face. Even children, babies, are able to encode certain facial expression. Research suggests that there are 5 basic expressions that can be shown on the face even as a child. These are sadness, fear, anger, disgust, and happiness. A 6th emotion, which has generated mixed findings, is the emotion of surprise. But that also can be shown on the face. So even though we talk about these 5 or 6 emotions, we are not saying that humans are only capable of expressing these emotions. But these are basic emotions that even children are able to show on the face. We say that facial expressions are universal. What then do we mean? If a Ghanaian is happy, he smiles. If an Asian is happy, he or she would smile. So a smile is universal. It does not mean happiness in one context and means sadness in another. A smile would mean happiness in different cultures, in various, so it's a universal expression on the face. Then we say that despite our cultural differences or geographical locations, all of us are able to encode, that is exhibit, or decode, interpret these facial expressions that are basic. So what then are we saying? That these expressions are species specific and not cultural specific. Species specific, not culture specific. In other words, they are common to humanity and not to particular cultures. So a smile is not common only to Ghanaians, it's common to all humanity. And in fact, facial expressions have survival value. What do we mean by this? Your ability to decode, but most importantly, your ability to encode, right? But most importantly, to decode facial expressions would inure to your benefit, so that if somebody is angry, if you see a crocodile, for instance, with the teeth bared out, if you see a snake that is hissing, you see another human being showing an expression of anger, you know, it tells you that this is danger. You know to stay away so that you survive. So in that sense, your ability to encode, but especially to decode facial expressions, are very important for your survival as a human being. Then we say that even though facial expressions help us to understand others, it is not always the situation that people express what they actually feel on their face. Because some people are very good at pretending. Pretense is one of the challenges you have to deal with when you are trying to learn about people's behavior through their face. Because I can be very sad, but I can put on a face that shows that, oh, all is well and I am happy. So in trying to explain behavior, you must look out for pretense. Are people really pretending? Then we also have the challenge of affect blends. Affect blends is where the face registers two emotions at the same time. So one part of the face registers one emotion and the other part registers another emotion. For instance, somebody may be smiling, their lips may be smiling, but their eyes are not smiling. And if you are able to read these nonverbal cues, you would really know whether what the person is trying to exhibit is exactly how they feel. Then again, facial expression, reading facial expressions is challenged by our cultural backgrounds. Within every culture, there are display rules. And display rules simply refer to those culturally defined rules regarding what behavior is appropriate or inappropriate. For instance, in our Ghanaian context, the display rule, for instance, is that men should not cry, right? So if you are looking at a man's face to determine whether he's happy or not, you may say, oh, he's all right, when in fact, he may be dying within. In many Asian cultures, in Japan, for instance, the display rule is that women should not smile or laugh loudly, openly, with their mouth open wide. So often you will see that ladies in such contexts will try to cover their mouth when they want to have a big laugh. And those are the display rules. So you may think the person is not excited, but in fact, they are excited, but are just trying to conform to the culturally defined rules of behavior, of exhibiting facial expressions. Another cue or channel of nonverbal communication is the eyes. You can learn about how people feel through the eyes. In fact, we say that the eyes are the window to the soul. And so when somebody is saying something, when you are relating to somebody, engaging somebody, a look in the person's eye, how they carry their eyes, would tell you what exactly they are thinking or what they are feeling to a very large extent. So for instance, a high level of gazing or eye contact can be a sign of liking or friendliness, right? What do we say in our local parlance? When a man is interested in a woman, we say he gives her eyes. The way he keeps looking or staring may be an indication of liking. But it's also true that too much gazing and how it is done may be a sign of anger or hostility. I remember that growing up, often when you are misbehaving, your mother may not talk. All she needed to do was give you a stare, will look at you hard in a way that tells you that you have to put a stop to your behavior. So the eyes can communicate. Your eyes may, the way you look at things may be an indication of suspicion. So you are looking at somebody in a way that tells the person, I'm not too sure about your conduct. Or your eyes can communicate surprise. It can also communicate disgust. It depends on how you manipulate the eyes, right? Sometimes when people want to show you that they are upset with you, what do we say? We say the person was eyeing me, or the person eyed me in a way that communicated the fact that I'm disgusted by your behavior, right? And we say that the eye contact is also shaped by a people's culture. For instance, in many cultures, you cannot look an adult in the eye when you are talking to the person. In many Asian and African cultures, a direct eye contact may be interpreted as a sign of disrespect. So when you are speaking to an elderly person, you look down and say what you have to say. Looking them directly in the eye may be a sign of arrogance or disrespect. But let's quickly also point to the fact that in some other cultures, in many Western societies, if you want to prove that you are being honest or truthful, then you should be able to maintain eye contact. Avoidance of eye contact may be interpreted as a sign of dishonesty, as a sign of you being you telling a lie. Then we also have body language. And body language, you can communicate through your body, what we call body language. And this is provided by the position of your body, the posture of your body, and the movement of your body or body parts. All these communicate messages to people around you. For instance, large amounts of body movements, especially ones in which one part of the body does something to another, may be an indication of nervousness, right? So when you are talking to somebody and you are rubbing your body, scratching your body, twisting your fingers, it may suggest that you are nervous, or you are scratching your hair, doing something, one part of the body doing something to another, may suggest that you are not confident enough, or you are nervous, or you are being untruthful about some situation. Then we say that your body language can also reveal a lot about your physical status. It tells how old you are, how you carry yourself. Will tell whether you are young or you are old, without you telling anybody your real age. So from a distance, I can just watch how you walk, and I can put you in a certain age bracket. The gait in your steps, the vigor with which you carry your body, all of these communicate. It tells about your mood. When you are excited, perhaps, or happy, perhaps you would walk swinging your arms. But when you are feeling miserable or depressed, you perhaps would walk with your shoulders slammed down. And anybody who sees you walking just knows that perhaps you are not in the best of moods. So you communicate also with your body. The way you sit, the position of the body. Are you sitting upright? Are you standing chest out? Are you sitting leg crossed? All of these sense impressions helps people to form perceptions about you. An aspect of body movements that we need to consider is gestures and emblems. Gestures are those type of body movements that carry a highly specific meaning within a particular culture. So the meaning we have for a particular gesture is unique to our culture. It may not have the same meaning in another culture. In other words, emblems vary from culture to culture. For instance, in our parts, we have the way we greet. The way we greet when you meet people in a gathering, right? If somebody sees you and does this sign, a thumbs up, right? It means I'm proud of you. In our part of the world, in Ghana, if the thumbs up changes from a top direction to a down direction, you can interpret it as an insult. So for instance, if you are driving in traffic and you cross somebody or you drive in a way that the person is displeased with you, The person may not blurt out an insult, but may use the body language of this to tell you that I am displeased with you. We understand what it means. It's an insult, right? So these are gestures that we use in a particular context that may have meanings. If you are engaging somebody and the person does a fist to your face, it suggests that if I'm prepared to fight you. And so without saying anything, all that sign alone has communicated some message to you. Besides these main channels, there are other sources of nonverbal communication, and I want us to consider some of these. You can communicate through personal space, right? So how you use personal space can send certain messages across to people. Whether you are standing too far or too close to a person, or sitting too far or too close to a person, may suggest their impressions about you. It may suggest confidence or the lack of confidence. But what is normal depends on the particular culture or context. So for instance, as a teacher, it may be normal to stand by you during exam situations to walk through in terms of invigilation. But it may not be too normal to get too close. Either I would start feeling uncomfortable or I would make my student uncomfortable. If your parent calls you, maybe you are in a room next door and shouts out your name. In our context, the expectation is that you come out of the room to address your parent. But if you stand in there and throw out answers or responses to their question, that may be considered too far a distance, and that may be considered disrespectful. So how you use personal space helps people create impressions about you. Then we can also communicate through touch. And when it comes to touch, the things to consider or the questions you must answer are, who does the touching? If somebody is touching you, you are asking, who is touching me and what's the person trying to communicate? Is the person touching me a family member? Is the person touching me a friend or a stranger? And important to also consider is the gender of the person who is touching you. So I imagine that if I'm touching my child, that would be normal. If I give my son a hug, that may be normal. But if a stranger comes and all of a sudden gives you a hug, it may make the person uncomfortable. So you have to answer the question of who is doing the touching. If I talk up, the next question is, what is the nature of the touch? Is it gentle? Is it rough? Is it brief or prolonged? All of these communicate. Often when you find yourself in groups, for instance, you find yourself at church, you may be asked by the preacher to shake the person next to you. Do people shake your hand and hold on to it? Or they just hold your hand briefly in a hurry to take their hand off? How the handshake happens may suggest some impressions. Which part of the body is touched? How people touch each other may suggest the relationship between them. So if I see you hugging another, I know the kind of relationship you have. If I see somebody giving another a pat on the back, I'm able to form an impression of the relationship they have. Which part of the body is touched? And what is the context within which this touch happens? Is it in the stadium? Is it in the lecture hall? Is it in the hospital? So that if I go to the hospital and a gynecologist is assessing me as a female patient, he has the right to do that to determine what ailment I may be reporting. So who does the touching is a doctor. What is the nature of the touch? Is a diagnostic touch to determine, so the doctor may be touching your abdomen to ask, do you feel any pain? Do you feel any pain? That is the nature of the touch. Gentle may be brief or prolonged depending on the condition you report. Which part of the body is touched? If I go and tell the doctor I have abdominal pains, then the expectation is that he may be touching my abdomen and not my breasts. So all of these will send messages across. In which context? This is in the hospital context, right? So if, for instance, you find yourself again in a stadium, everybody is rushing out of the stadium, you cannot expect not to be touched. Bodies will rub against bodies because there are many people in a crowd setting trying to get out. But if you are in a context where the person does not need to rub against you and does that, that also helps you form a certain impression about the person. Then we say that you can also communicate via your body scent, right? You just need to walk into my office and how you smell will give me an impression about you. That this is a sophisticated person, okay, he has this sweet perfume. Or this is somebody who's not had his bath or her bath in days, and that makes me put you in a certain category. How you smell would communicates a lot about you. There is a research in the mandatory text by Miller and Manna, where they looked at the correlation between the smell of women's smell during ovulation period and how that influences men's arousal levels. I would encourage you to read. But the experiment briefly had two groups of women, a control group that were not ovulating and an experimental group of women that were ovulating. And they wore T-shirts. These T-shirts were given to men to smell. The evidence showed that those who smelled the T-shirts worn by ovulating women were aroused. And so a correlation was drawn between body scent and people's responses, reactions. What do we use nonverbal communication for? What are the functions? Nonverbal communication helps us in self-presentation. Somebody may not know you, may never have encountered you, but the way you present yourself, the way you carry yourself tells a lot about you. The person needs to look at your face, the person needs to look at your eyes, the person needs to see how you move your body, how you touch, how you relate, and would form an impression about you. So for instance, I am on a panel interviewing people for a job. If you come, how you manipulate nonverbal cues may inure to your benefit. So you sit before the panel, you sit upright, chest out, smiling, nodding, right? Maintaining eye contact. All these may show that you're a very intelligent, confident person. And these can apply in many social contexts, when you're on a date or in many contexts. So be aware of these channels and use them to your advantage in creating positive self-presentations. Nonverbal communication also helps us to detect deception. It helps us to know when people are being truthful or when people are lying, right? And the things to look out for in this regard, one of the main things is to look out for micro-expressions. Micro-expressions are those fleeting facial expressions that last for a split second. So for instance, I meet you and ask you, oh, how was the exam? And perhaps you had difficulty with the exam. So I ask you, how was the exam? And then maybe I wasn't looking in your direction. So you're like, oh, it was fine. I did not catch that split expression of difficulty. So if you really want to detect deception, you must pay attention to micro-expressions, those ones that last for minutes before people put on the mask and pretend that all is well. You can also detect deception through the eyes. When people are avoiding eye contact, it may be an indication that they are not being truthful. When people are blinking unnecessarily, it may be an indication that they are not being truthful. Dilated pupils may suggest some message, right? So you are looking at eye contact, too much look in your eyes, or avoidance of eye contact. All of these may send across certain messages depending on the context. Then we talk about adapters. That can also help you detect deception. And these simply refer to the situations where people move their hands to touch various parts of their body. So like we said, the person is perhaps pulling at his beard or playing with his mustache or playing with her ears, playing with her fingers, trying to scratch the hair or pull at the hair. All of these little things, you know, rubbing the... You know, people do these things when they are nervous, and these are adapters. If you see people exhibiting too many adapters, then you should question why that is happening. there may be some element of deception. Then we can also talk about exaggerated facial expressions, right? When people are smiling too broadly, or people are appearing too sad than they should be within the situation, right? Then you may be wondering. Sometimes people put on that sweet, innocent face, what we call in our context as the baby face, just to hide some kind of deception. So it's important to look out for these exaggerated facial expressions to know if people are being honest or people are being deceptive. Then it's also important to look at inter-channel discrepancies. Note we have said within nonverbal communication that there are various channels. So see if these messages that are being sent through all the channels converge, or are there any discrepancies between the channels. If you notice any differences between the channels of nonverbal communication, then it may be an indication of deception. What do I mean here? For instance, I'm looking at the agreement between your eyes, your face, and your body movement. You cannot be smiling with your eyes or on your face, and yet your body is all slammed up. There is a break between what you are trying to depict on your face and the way you carry your body. So when I notice that inter-channel discrepancy, I would have to ask further questions to be sure that you are not being deceptive. And this aspect I'm going to talk about next is not really part of nonverbal communication in the technical sense, but it's a tool that you can use to detect if people are being deceptive. And here we are talking about changes in speech or paralanguage. You are looking at the pitch or the tone of people's voices. So that if, for instance, you know me to be somebody who speaks quite fast, and all of a sudden you are asking me a question and I start to stutter or stammer. So you ask me, where were you yesterday? And I start, oh, yesterday. That may be an indication that I am not being truthful. Or if you know me to be a relatively slow talker, and all of a sudden you ask me a question and I'm rattling, talking so fast, that may also be an indication of deception. Note in all of these I have said that may be, it may not be exact, but that gives you reason to ask further questions to know if the person is being truthful or not. So basically what we are saying is that with nonverbal communication, you cannot not communicate. Because every day of our lives, we are communicating, right? So from all of these that we've talked about, can you discuss the statement that with nonverbal communication, you cannot not communicate? An aspect of this discussion that I want us to also consider is the fact that these days we have an abundance of technology. And how do you communicate via technology, right? How do you encode messages? And how do you interpret or decode messages? If I send you a text message, a WhatsApp message, an email message, I have sent you words without voice. I have sent you words and I am not present. So you are not able to see my face, see my eyes, see my body movements. So how do you know if what I am communicating is exactly what it is? It's important to know the intentions or the motives behind the words people throw at us through technology. And it's important to know who is communicating, the gender of the person. So when I send a message, the challenge here is that people's emotions are stripped off the words they send. Right? The person is not there for you to read the nonverbal cues. So they send you words and emotions of whether they want to be sarcastic, emotions of humor, emotions of sadness are stripped away. And all you have is the words which you have to interpret. And sometimes the way we try to beat down this challenge is by adding emoticons, a smiling face, a surprised eyes, or some face to show that I may not be there, but these words, I'm trying to communicate this. So this is one of the channels that we communicate, and it's important to look out for the message behind the words that people communicate via the several means of technology. So what have we sought to do? We have sought to discuss the issue of social perception, and this is just one part of the discussion. In this session, we've sought to explain how people explain the temporary behaviors of others using nonverbal communication. And we've identified the several channels of nonverbal communication and how we have to encode, but most importantly, decode these cues to be able to know how to detect deception and to be able to present ourselves in the positive light. In our subsequent sessions, we would explain the more permanent approaches of social perception. Thank you.